In a crowded courtroom, an old veteran stood alone, holding nothing but a folded flag. The judge laughed at his tears, mocking his pain in front of everyone. But just as the gavel was about to fall, the doors opened and the man who walked in changed everything. What happened next shook the entire country. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? The courtroom buzzed like a broken hive, stale fluorescent lights flickering above ranks of cheap wood benches, and smug attorneys scrolling their phones as if justice were just another routine formality. And behind the bench sat Judge Franklin Delaney, a man whose polished gavel had struck down mercy more times than he could count, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped best judge ever mug, oblivious to the irony, until the double doors creaked open and in shuffled Sergeant Daniel Hayes, 68, spine bowed not by age, but by memory, every step a testimony to wars fought and brothers buried. His uniform faded to gray, combat boots worn thin, and a look in his eyes that made even the bailiff pause, because it wasn't fear he carried. It was the unbearable weight of dignity in a room that had none. And when the judge glanced up, lips already curling into a smirk, he barely skimmed the file. Foreclosure. Failure to appear. Defendant representing himself. His voice echoed like mockery in a chamber built for power, not fairness. And as Daniel approached the stand, gripping the letter from the bank like it was his last lifeline, he spoke in a voice hoarse with disuse. Your Honor, this land it was given to me by the government in '95. For service. For sacrifice. It's mine. But Delaney chuckled, loud enough to bounce off the gallery walls. Mr. Hayes, the government giveth, and the bank taketh away. Welcome to capitalism. Triggering muffled laughter from junior lawyers, even the court reporter stifling a grin. But Daniel didn't laugh, he just stood, stoic, blinking back a storm he refused to let fall. Because this courtroom had already decided he was nothing more than a number, a nuisance, a worn-out relic in a world addicted to youth and credit scores. And as the judge leaned back and yawned, asking mockingly, "Do you have any evidence that your house deserves to remain yours?" Daniel pulled from his coat a folded flag, creased with reverence, the kind handed to widows and mothers at cemeteries soaked in 21 gun salutes, and whispered, "This is all I have left," placing it on the rail. And for 1 second, just one, the room fell quiet until the judge laughed again. Louder this time. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes, but flags don't pay mortgages," slamming the gavel with finality, eyes already on the next case, until a hand shot up from the back row. Young man, early 30s, sharp suit, sharper stare, objection, he called out, though he wasn't part of the case. And when the judge barked, "Who the hell are you?" the man replied, "Elijah Lawson, attorney, pro bono counsel for Sergeant Hayes. Filed under emergency appeal 10 minutes ago." And suddenly the courtroom crackled with a new energy, one of confusion, challenge, rebellion. And when Delaney laughed again, this time nervously, Elijah stepped forward and said words that silenced the room. "You laughed at a man who buried brothers while you filed parking tickets in law school," handing the judge a thick file stamped Lawson Foundation for Veterans, and within it documents, affidavits, bank violations, proof of forged signatures, and, at the back, a petition signed by over 300,000 veterans demanding the case be reviewed under the newly proposed Veteran Displacement Act Reform Bill, which Elijah himself had co-authored after watching his own grandfather Thomas Hayes, Daniel's older brother, die of pneumonia in a homeless shelter, wearing dog tags no one noticed. Delaney tried to dismiss him, but the press had already arrived, tipped off by a viral live stream titled "Judge Laughs at Crying Veteran." And within hours, Daniel's image was everywhere, sitting alone on the stand, fingers trembling over a folded flag, eyes red but dry, a symbol not of pity, but of everything the country claimed to honor yet discarded when inconvenient. Reporters swarmed the courthouse. Veterans in full dress lined the steps in silent protest. Bikers with pow patches stood shoulder to shoulder with retired Marines holding signs that read, "He fought for you. You evicted him." And when a journalist asked Daniel why he hadn't cried in court, he replied, "I cried when I watched a 19-year-old bleed out in a foxhole. This is just noise." And that line echoed across newsrooms, Twitter, cable debates, printed beneath photos of Daniel saluting in front of his boarded-up home, while sheriffs in mirrored sunglasses tossed his medals in a cardboard box like trash. Meanwhile, in Washington, the president paused mid-briefing to ask for an update on the veteran case, ordering a full investigation into the judicial handling of veteran foreclosures nationwide. And overnight, city councils began issuing stay orders. Banks froze pending seizures, and Judge Delaney, once the unshakable face of stern justice, found himself plastered across every screen as the punchline to a nation's guilt. His smile contrasted against Daniel's pain in every thumbnail, with hashtags like #StandWithSergeantHayes and #JusticeForOurVets trending globally. Still, Daniel said nothing, refused interviews, declined photo ops, choosing instead to spend his days at the local VA hospital volunteering, handing out coffee and quiet comfort to men who understood the weight of silence, while Elijah fought a legal war behind closed doors, rallying non-profits, filing class action suits. And when the appeal finally reached the Federal Court of Veterans' Rights, Judge Marisol Vega herself, a former Army JAG, read the transcripts aloud. Every laugh, every smirk, every moment of disrespect, and said, what this court witnessed was not justice, it was a man stripped of dignity by the very country he defended, reversing the ruling with a bang of her gavel that felt like thunder. Daniel's home was restored, the deed rewritten, not just in ink, but in national memory, and during the press conference that followed, Daniel was nowhere to be seen. He was at the cemetery, laying flowers on his brother's grave, whispering, "I kept your promise, Tom," while behind him, dozens of strangers in uniform saluted in absolute silence. The photo of that moment won a Pulitzer, the old soldier saluting a brother, not for glory, not for recognition, but for closure. And when Elijah handed him the official certificate proclaiming him the legal and eternal owner of the property, Daniel just nodded, quietly slipping it into the same folder that held his enlistment papers and the last letter his brother ever wrote. Schools began teaching his story. Lawmakers pushed for the Hayes Bill. mandating no veteran could be evicted without a federal hearing. And even Judge Delaney, now disbarred and disgraced, was forced to testify before Congress on the abuse of judicial power, while Daniel, unaware or maybe just uninterested, fixed his porch swing, planted new roses by the mailbox, and helped build ramps for other disabled vets. Because he didn't need applause, he needed purpose. And years later, when he passed away peacefully in his sleep, his funeral was attended by senators, generals, and men who'd once shared foxholes with ghosts. And the eulogy was delivered by Elijah, who stood on shaking legs and said, "He never raised his voice, never asked for anything, and still changed the world." As 6 veterans carried Daniel's casket draped in the flag he had once placed on a courtroom railing, and when it was lowered into the ground, the wind shifted, carrying the sound of 21 rifles cracking against a sky that seemed to hold its breath. Because sometimes it takes one man's silence to expose a nation's shame, and sometimes the laugh of a judge becomes the echo of a reckoning no one can ignore.